one of the strengths of centers that many times the funders really don't look at is how a center really generates the new generation of scholars and tries to increase the critical mass of scholars addressing a particular issue, in this case, mental health disparities. I direct the Asian American Center on Disparities Research. We were originally funded as an advanced research center by National Institute of Mental Health, and we're the only really nationally focused research center that addresses mental health issues and mental health disparities for Asian American communities and populations. Right, so there's sort of two versions of the center. The first center, the original center started at UCLA. Stan Su was the principal investigator and director of the center. I was the associate director. And Stan and I put the grant together that obtained funding from National Institute of Mental Health. So the center started in 1987, and the center renewed for several cycles up until, I believe, 2002 or 2003. And then there was sort of a gap in funding until the center that I directed was funded in 2007. So the climate, in the 1980s, I think there was a growing appreciation for research on cultural diversity in mental health as well as in other areas. But there really had not been centers or groups of scholars that had really come together to focus on these issues. And so, just to give you a sort of a flavor of that kind of climate, I went to Stan Su, and I said, Stan, we should compete. There was a request for an application calling for these centers, and I told him we should. You're the most premier scholar in Asian American mental health. We should really submit for a grant to start a center like this. And his response was very interesting. Rather than sort of being excited, he sort of said, "No, we'd never get it." And I think it was because even though he was one of the top scholars in the area, and still is, he felt that that there wasn't really much support at the federal level. So even though people would verbally talk about the need to do this kind of research, they were not funding much research on cultural diversity, particularly in mental health. Okay. And so I think his response sort of reflected that, and I kept sort of cajoling him, and finally he sort of caved in, I guess, just because he just wanted to get rid of me, and we essentially applied together, and in those days, the analogy is like a Chinese restaurant, where the owners, they cook the food, they take the orders, and then they serve it. That's basically what this grant was. It was just on Stan and I, and we spent hours and hours. Those were the days, just to give you also, remember the 1980s, there was no such thing as laptops or desktop word processors. There were these dedicated word processors which were very slow. So, and we had no secretary. We had no support staff, no grad students, no residents, nobody to really help us, and we put it together, and we received word that received word that we were ranked the lowest of all the applications. And in those days, that's when the institutes had money. They would actually send site teams out to review your grants, to do a site visit. And so we had made the first cut, but we were number 8 of the 8 applications. And I remember Stan and I saying, well, they told us this. So this sort of it was very discouraging, but we geared up for the site visit, and we must have done something right at the site visit, because after that, we were ranked, one of the top 3, and so we got funding at the time. But it was really an uphill battle. When I think of the first center, I think a number of key milestones were that, a number of sets of studies came out of the first center, which was that, there was a major study done on ethnic match that was published by the center, and then in '87, as we were writing for the center, that's when we came out with our paper on giving and the proximal distal model that Stan and I wrote about, and so those are key publications. But also there's some other ones. David Takeuchi, under the auspices of the center, started some of the major epidemiological studies on Chinese Americans in Los Angeles, on Filipinos in the Bay Area and Hawaii, and then it culminated after the center, after he left the center, in terms of the National Latino Asian American Study, which was the national epidemiological study on Latinos and Asian Americans. So I think the center spawned a lot of really important work. I think we, in terms of the center that followed the first center, the Asian American Center on Disparities Research, we basically built on a lot of that research, really looking at this underutilization phenomena, but then sort of have started to really go into what really constitutes culturally competent care. And I think our focus on trying to identify really critical cultural factors. Margaret Leighton has the term salient variables, and by salient variables she means variables that have an effect on an important behavior or disorder, but the other condition for something to be salient has to be changeable. So even though even though ethnic match is very useful, and what is it about ethnic match, such as the perception of similarities, that we can actually change and train people to do to actually try to capitalize on ethnic match, or to deal with it when you're not ethnically matched. And so I think our center has really I think the major contributions to the first center was to really just put Asian American mental health research on the map. When you look at all the researchers that came from that center, many of them are making substantial contributions to Asian American mental health now. David Takeuchi, Sumi Okazaki, Anna Lau, and so the center has sort of like been a good sports team. They generate better coaches and players, and so who themselves then have started their own teams, and so the center, I think, the first center really set that in motion. In fact, when you talk to a lot of people who went to that center, they say, just the environment, the academic and intellectual environment of being at that center was so different, because most scholars who are focused on cultural diversity feel they're really isolated and sometimes, and many times, marginalized, whereas the center valued that work. And so you clearly weren't in the margins, you were in the mainstream. So it was, you were a mainstream worker within that context. And I think we've tried to really perpetuate and continue that tradition here at this center, in terms of building on the research findings, but instead more focusing on the dynamics of psychotherapy. So this center, the difference is that we've much more focused on mental health treatment whereas the other center was, trying to have impact in all these different areas. And again, this center has spun off a lot of young scholars who are really doing some excellent work. Winnie Mack in University of Hong Kong, Irene Park, others, Brian Kim in Hawaii. So the center has, again, I think that's I think that is one of the strengths of centers that many times the funders really don't look at, is how the center really generates the new generation of scholars and tries to increase the critical mass of scholars addressing a particular issue, in this case, mental health disparities. In terms of the climate, I think it's, given NIMH's more focus on neuropsychology, and is that it's gone away from social behavior research. So whereas in the 1990s and 2000, not early 2000, I think it was very, very, I think the institutes were sort of becoming more appreciative and really understanding cultural diversity research, where I think now it's sort of regressed back a bit, and so it's even more challenging. So what's happened is a lot of our work is now being, and we're taking a lot of our work and applying for grants actually outside of the National Institute of Mental Health. So we're building on our research, but we're building on the research with institutes that seem to be much more appreciative and of how cultural issues affect response to treatment. We have to adapt.